I read this book with Prophet a few years ago, Johnny Cash, his autobiography written with Patrick Carr, 1997 published. He had written a couple of books before that, one he alludes to in here, Man in Black, back in the 1970s. This is the story, the part I want to focus on is the story of his coming to Christ. How Johnny Cash found God. Not that he'd ever been without God, but Christ found him, really, is a better way to think of it. He had hit rock bottom, literally. He was in a cave. And his marriage had fallen apart. His wife, he was still married to his first wife, Vivian, who he had married in the 50s. He'd gotten into an affair with country singer June Carter. But his music career was still pretty successful right through the mid-60s. The problem was that in order to sustain his music career, he'd had to get onto amphetamines and other stimulants, and he was fighting unsuccessfully in the 1960s to keep his career and his relationships alive. And this is where we take up the story in Chapter 6. I just went on and on. I was taking amphetamines by the handful, literally, and barbiturates by the handful too, not to sleep, but just to stop the shaking from the amphetamines. I was canceling shows and recording dates. When I did manage to show up, I couldn't sing because my throat was too dried out from the pills. My weight was down to 155 pounds on a 6'1.5" frame. I was in and out of jails, hospitals, car wrecks. I was a walking vision of death, and that's exactly how I felt. I was scraping the filthy bottom of the barrel of life. By October 1967, I'd had enough. I hadn't slept or eaten in days. There was nothing left of me. His prior life, he says, was just a distant memory at this point through the fog. Whatever I'd become in his place, that is his father's place, he said, it felt barely human. I never wanted to see another dawn. I had wasted my life. I had drifted so far away from God and every stabilizing force in my life that I felt there was no hope for me. I knew what to do. I'd go to Nickajack Cave on the Tennessee River just north of Chattanooga, and let God take me from this earth and put me wherever he puts people like me. You can't go into Nickajack Cave anymore. The Army Corps of Engineers put a dam in, which closed off the entrance we used. It was an amazing place, an opening 150 feet wide and 50 feet high into a system of caves, some of them bigger than 2 or 3 football stadiums, that ran under the mountains all the way down into Alabama. I'd been there before with friends, Bob Johnston once, Hank Williams Jr. another time, exploring and looking for Civil War and Indian artifacts. Andrew Jackson and his army had slaughtered the Nickajack Indians there, men, women, and children, and soldiers from both sides of the war between the states had taken shelter in the caves at various times during the conflict. The Indians left their bones in mounds. The soldiers left their names and affiliations, and sometimes a message carved into the limestone of a chamber close to the entrance. John Fox, CSA, Reuben Matthews, Union, Jeff Davis, burn in hell. The remains of the dead among them were joined by the bones of the many spelunkers and amateur adventurers who'd lost their lives in the caves over the years, usually by losing their way. And it was my hope and intention to join that company. If I crawled in far enough, I thought, I'd never be able to find my way back out, and nobody would be able to locate me until I was dead, if indeed they ever could. The dam would be going in soon. I parked my Jeep and started crawling, and I crawled and crawled and crawled until after 2 or 3 hours the batteries in my flashlight wore out, and I lay down to die in total darkness. The absolute lack of light was appropriate, for at that moment I was as far from God as I have ever been. My separation from him, the deepest and most ravaging of the various kinds of loneliness I felt over the years, seemed finally complete. It wasn't. I thought I left him, but he hadn't left me. I felt something very powerful start to happen to me, a sensation of utter peace, clarity, and sobriety. I didn't believe it at first. I couldn't understand it. How, after being awake for so long, and driving my body so hard, and taking so many pills, dozens of them, scores, even hundreds, could I possibly feel all right? The feeling persisted, though, and then my mind started focusing on God. He didn't speak to me. He never has, and I'll be very surprised if he ever does. But I do believe that at times he has put feelings in my heart and perhaps even ideas in my head. There, in Nickajack Cave, I became conscious of a very clear, simple idea. I was not in charge of my destiny. I was not in charge of my own death. I was going to die at God's time, not mine. I hadn't prayed over my decision to seek death in the cave, but that hadn't stopped God from intervening. I struggled, feeling defeated by the practicalities of the matter. There I was, after all, in total darkness, with no idea of which way was up, down, in, or out of that incredible complexity of passages and chambers so deep inside the earth that no scent or light or sensation from the outside could possibly reach me. How could I escape the death I'd willed? No answer came, but an urging did. I had to move, so I did. I started crawling in whatever direction suggested itself, feeling ahead with my hands to guard against plunging over some precipice, just moving slowly and calmly, crab-like. I have no idea how long it took, but at a certain point I felt a breath of wind on my back and knew that wherever the breeze was blowing from, that was the way out. I followed it until I began to see light, and finally I saw the opening of the cave. When I walked out, June Carter, was there, with a basket of food and drink, and my mother. I was confused. I thought she was in California. I was right, she had been. I knew there was something wrong, she said. I had to come and find you. As we drove back toward Nashville, I told my mother that God had saved me from killing myself. I told her I was ready to commit myself to him and do whatever it took to get off drugs. I wasn't lying. We'll follow it up with the story of Johnny Cash's withdrawal and his complete recovery, and the building up of his faith over the period from 1967 through the 70s. I put in a link to a Vivian video. It was on Felix Mendelssohn, a Jewish Lutheran who writes the greatest music ever written by a 17-year-old. See you soon.